President Cyril Ramaphosa made no mention or easing of restrictions on South African higher education and elementary education sectors. So the issue now of home learning becomes even more critical. And with remote learning being a fairly unfamiliar territory, concerns have been raised about how it will work and whether it will deepen the divide between the haves and the have-nots. We have the pleasure of speaking with the education expert, Professor Mary Metcalfe, who joins us now via Skype to discuss the latest regarding education in the country. Professor Metcalfe, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Well, now that the president went into greater detail outlining some of the levels at which the lockdown will be applied in South Africa, but then he made no mention, of the timelines. So I guess then it elongates and extends further the uncertainty with regards to the schooling system in South Africa, isn't it?
Well, I think it's good that you use the word uncertainty, because this virus has put us in a position where we're going to be having extended periods of uncertainty, and so much of what is happening is going to be unpredictable. So even as we rush to put into place plans, we know that those may change again. The president didn't talk about education, but tomorrow the Minister Motshekga, is in the afternoon going to give us an update in terms of the plans for aspects of the continuity of learning. And why I say aspects is because she's already given an indication in public discussions that she anticipates a phased-in re-entry into schools. Now, that's quite consistent with what the president was announcing this evening, that this is a complex situation, that it affects different sectors differently, it affects different localities differently. What the minister has indicated so far is that she's hoping that she will be able to facilitate the reintroduction of grade 12 as the first grade in high school and grade 7 as the first grade in primary school, and then gradually reintroduce, well, not gradually, but over a period of time, gradually introduce the other grades. There's questions about if that would apply across all of the provinces and municipalities equally, because as we've seen, some municipalities in some provinces are more affected than others. But your question about home learning at home becomes actually crucial then, because if grade 12s and grade 7s come back first and other grades come later, or if there's subsequent lockdowns as a response to the virus, it does mean that many learners are not going to be in school. And the challenge that we as a country have, as well as families in the education department, is how do we maximize learning opportunities in a way that we reach all of our children? Because not everybody has the devices, the data, the access to reliable Wi-Fi, reliable networks to be able to learn from home. And this is going to be the big challenge for the country going forward.
Well, taking into cognizance, as you've mentioned, some of the creative mechanisms that schools should adopt in dealing with coronavirus is one thing, but then capacitating the students and the pupils, to embrace this novel or this new way of learning, such as remote learning or online learning, is a totally different matter. So do you think there needs to be capacity? These students need to be capacitated, and if so, by whom?
So the capacitation in terms of fully online learning and being able to have a tablet, a laptop, and a phone that's able to be a smartphone is something that we are not going to be able to do very rapidly. What we do need to do is to use mechanisms of communication that are accessible to all South Africans, and that would include radio and television, together with very careful supervision in home and community on how to structure the day to incorporate those learning opportunities, how to engage with their school books, which all children hopefully have taken home with them, so that they can use their textbook, they can use their exercise book, they can use the DBE workbook, and be able to benefit from those scheduled lessons. It means parents need to be aware of the scheduling. Even if they've got no access to any form of internet, they can access radio and television, but they need to know the schedules and they need to create routines for learners to be able to learn. What this means is we're not going to be able to cover as much content as if learners were at school. But it does mean that families need to accept the responsibility. Well, I'm sure they accept the responsibility, but they need to be able to think about how they structure Children's Day to maximize learning.
And I also think that parents as well need some sort of guidance on how to mentor these pupils, because being a parent is one thing, and then being an educational mentor to their children is something that most parents are not so accustomed to. And now that a month already is gone of inaction, and that has severely dented the education system in South Africa, there have been calls that some of the students or learners, or in fact every learner, should be progressed to the next level despite their marks or their marks at the end of the year. Are you also supporting that call?
Well, the minister's been very clear that we need to be able to look at the curriculum and how we can manage that in relation to assessment. Now, to think about progressing a learner to a next grade, I think is the wrong way of thinking about it, because the learning of 1 year builds on the learning of the previous year. So you can't just say, well, I didn't learn what I would have liked to have learned in grade 5, but I'm going into grade 6. So there's a lot of work happening nationally and provincially to understand what is the contraction of time, how do we maximize the use of time. For example, we must stop thinking that we're going to have school holidays on the same pattern as we've had them before. How do we maximize the use of the school day? So what do we do to make more time available? And secondly, how do we adjust learning and assessment? It's a challenge nobody anticipated coming, and we are not ready for it. But I can see in all of the education departments that I'm discussing these issues with a huge amount of work and effort to say, how do we support learners to learn as much as possible, to be able to cope with the return to school and to be in a classroom with social distancing, with physical distancing, in a way that we can maximize learning. And this virus is going to be with us for a couple of years. The president has made that clear. A lot of the scientists are saying that we can expect to see subsequent lockdowns. The important thing is to make sure that schools are safe places, so that we make sure that we don't have more infections that emanate from schools and from contacts. It's a huge burden of responsibility for the provincial departments, the districts, the school management teams to manage physical distancing, hand washing, so that learners and teachers are safe.
Yeah, you kept on, referring to how we should maximize learning. And I guess that is a call that will be made by the education experts, in particular the basic education department, which I suppose, will encourage parents to find ways of maximizing on the learning in South Africa as we get to grips with the coronavirus. How then do we maximize learning with limited budgets? Because there is absolutely no way that the government can issue out a budget for extra material to learn at home.
I feel that if we manage a process of all learners retrieving the books that actually many of them have left at school, a combination of the existing learning material, that's the DBE workbooks, the exercise books, the textbooks that learners have, that those can be used at home with the radio and television broadcasts. If we have learners returning to school for a period in which teachers can give them the guidance, in which parents can receive a manual of suggestions for how they can support learning, in which they receive the television and radio broadcasts, we are able to maximize learning without the huge budget that's going to be required to gear our learners up to be able to work online with devices, with Wi-Fi, with data.
And post the lockdown, Professor, how then do we monitor if the epidemic is getting out of control, and how do we respond, especially where education is concerned?
Well, the Minister Mkhize and his panel of experts and the President have been quite clear that the opening up in a phased way of particular sectors of the economy is going to be accompanied by continued testing, by continued quarantining, by continued tracing. Now, I believe that when schools open, my view is that we should be able to use the very careful procedures and protocols at schools to, in fact, identify children who may have been infected, and to be able to use that to identify the family and the community from which they come so that they can also be supported. So it's a complex interplay, and at this stage of our country's grappling with the coronavirus, there is so much uncertainty. We need to educate ourselves, we need to be informed, we need to be able to speak about our anxieties, but we must also know that what was clear in the President's address is that there's going to be a constant watching of the data in relation to infection and constant re-decisioning about what might be the most appropriate next steps. I think if you read carefully into what he's saying, yes, we're going into stage 4, we're in stage 5 now. When we're in stage 4, we're going to have to monitor what was the effect of opening schools, what was the effect of opening that sector of the economy in this locality or that locality, and what do we need to do in terms of perhaps going back to stage 5 or perhaps going down to stage 3. So I think we're fortunate that we're being led by such an expert and well-informed and rational group that's saying this is complex. Let's monitor the complexity. Let's look at the cause and effect that we're seeing in the patterns, and let's take appropriate steps always to make sure that we are keeping safe and keeping others safe.
Now, Professor, we don't have much time, unfortunately, but then before I let you go, without schools and feeding schemes, particularly in the disadvantaged communities, so many children will go hungry. Well, they are going hungry already because most of them, relied heavily on the school feeding schemes. So I guess then that is one facet of the entire school education learning system or model has been overlooked.
I agree with you that one of our great concerns should be the nutritional status of children, young children in particular, but all children. You are more resilient in terms of being able to fight off any intrusion of a virus if your systems are functioning and you are healthy. I think that the loss of the school feeding is something that we should be looking at very carefully. The minister is determined, and I understand why she's saying so, that we need to see children as part of families, and that it's family nutrition that we should be focusing on. And from what we can see with the measures announced by the President on Tuesday, what we see with the work of the Solidarity Fund, what we see with the increase in the child support grants, are all attempts to assist with ensuring a nutritional status for all of our children. That means that they will be well and healthy and able to resist the virus.
Education expert Professor Mary Metcalfe joining us via Skype. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.